Hello, colleagues. Once again, I would like to warmly welcome all of you to our continuing conversation, How Trauma Informs Love. Thank you very much for being part of this journey and showing up month after month. And this is our seventh session. And it is such a privilege to share this space together with you and continue to bring about the trauma awareness into our professional coaching. So with that, since I'm a little bit late to join the session, let us dive in. So today we have a topic that I believe some of you have been waiting for a while, which is about somatic printing, what happens in our body beyond our psychological, neurological aspects, beyond the nervous system, what happens in our body. And I also believe that there are many misconceptions around, slight misconceptions, I must say, around how we perceive about how the body encodes traumatic experiences and then how they become triggered. So today, I hope that we will be able to create some clarity around some of these misconceptions. Once again, thank you very much for those who are joining in this last minute, and let's get started. Right. So today, our focus is really to look at somatic trauma imprinting. As usual, I would like to mention that this content includes themes of challenging experience, adversities, trauma, and similar mental conditions. Therefore, please engage with caution. And my colleague, who will be sharing with you the certification registration link towards the end of the session. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask via chat room. And either within this session or in upcoming sessions, I will be more than happy to address them. So the sessions will also be, these recorded sessions will be available through our e-learning platform, Awaken Mind Guide, including these slides as well. So let's do a very quick recap, which we are now familiar with. So we are talking about the CTICC framework, Comprehensive Trauma-Informed Coaching Competency Framework. And what we have done is aligned it directly with ICF competency framework in a way that it's easy for us to effortlessly, seamlessly, we can incorporate the two. As you notice, the only difference is that we have an additional competence, which is foundational knowledge of trauma and trauma-related disorders. In fact, some of the discussions we have been having so far are focused on these areas. Moving on. So we are looking at cultivating trust and sensitivity that is required to create safety. So we are particularly right now addressing trauma-informed psychoeducation. So let's move on. Now, as we begin the session today, I think I would like to invite you to a familiar inquiry. When you work with your clients, you invite your client to tap into their body awareness, the wisdom which is within our body. And we call that somatic awareness. Soma being the body and somatic being bodily awareness. So you tap into your client's bodily awareness, somatic awareness. And when you invite your client into a place of somatic awareness, you may inquire, maybe the client is sharing with you about a specific emotion, specific situation. And then you might invite the client, if you focus on your body, where do you feel a sensation? You do this very often and you are used to doing this, right? So now let's do that same very experience, same very invitation. Here today, I'm not just necessarily asking you right now what is feeling in your body or where in your body you experience a sensation. My inquiry today is, when you consider stressful situations, stressful moments in life, we all tend to go through such situations time to time in life. Do you recognize any patterns? Are there specific areas in your body that may have a sensation, that may have a specific knowing about this situation you are in, perhaps stress. Many people have different answers to this. So I'm going to invite you to reflect a little bit. When you are about to, or when you are in a stressful situation, what areas of your body usually have a sensation, a recognition of what is happening to you? Do not interpret. Just be in the moment and try to recall, observe. So there you are, right? So we have an answer coming from my chest tightness, and I resonate with you. I also have chest tightness, and also slight heart palpitations in my case when there's stress. And then Susanna is saying chest, shoulders, breath, sometimes stomach. Heart, Lisa is sharing, right? Heather, stomach. Ramonda, cramped stomach, shoulders. So see, these experiences are not, we are not alone in these experiences. Always shoulders, you see, Brigitte, thank you. Thank you for sharing those insights, and thank you for your openness to share such experiences. And the stomach is a big one for me as well. I remember my grandmother, every time when there's a stressful situation, like let's say one of my cousins, so her grandchildren is late to come home or haven't heard from them for
Yes, sir.
many hours, all of a sudden my grandmom would say, I need to use the toilet. And she will run to the toilet because something happened in her stomach. And I see that same experience with my mother. And later, I did not notice for the longest, but I found myself in that same situation. Now, also, it happens time to time, but it's quite rare after I have been through my own healing journey. But at the same time, when there's
Luke, I'm throwing away trash. I'll be right back.
very often I experience this too, right? Okay, so may I invite you to keep your the okay, all right. Please keep your microphone muted so that we have no disturbances. All right. Yeah. There are some areas of our body that show up, not just momentarily, but also sometimes in long term. We notice these changes, right? So it could be jaw, it could be heart, it could be breath, posture, movement, and so on. So now that you have paid attention there a little bit, we continue into our discussion. So today we're talking about, continue to talk about trauma imprinting. So we remind ourselves what is trauma imprinting. So these are the enduring unconscious adaptations, beliefs, relational templates, identity structures, bodily patterns emerge from overwhelming, adverse, stressful, or depriving experience, and they continue to influence our perception, our behavior, our relationships, our life outcomes long after those challenging experiences have passed. And our topic today, particularly somatic imprinting, tend to be encoded in our body when a specific challenging experience or deprivation experience and been repeated over a long period of time, or we have been overwhelmed with an experience at once. So let's recall the difference between trauma responses and trauma imprints. When the dog attacked the person, later on, they are afraid of the dog. They cannot function momentarily. Acute dysfunction happens. Perhaps it's a freeze response, yeah, a freeze response. So that is a trauma response. We can directly connect the dots. At the same time, now you know the trauma imprinting is different and more complex. And also, they are quite elusive. That's what we have come to learn through our discussion so far about, in-depth discussion about relational imprints and identity imprints. It's true that what might have initiated this freeze response, dissociative response, seeing the dog, which is the trigger, but in long term, the imprint could be the unpredictability is dangerous. It might show up in a way that when we would like to go through a career shift, career transition, we become numb, we become frozen, or when we would like to invest in our development, perhaps we want to invest in our sales funnel, marketing funnel. We may want to invest in a new location, like an office, but we might feel very unsettled. We might find that very difficult to engage in because that unpredictability, risk taking might feel like dangerous. We might not even be able to connect the dots. That's the reason why I said it's elusive. I'm not saying this for 100% accurately. We can't say that because it's always a combination of things. Most of the time, it's a combination of things as we get to the level of discussing imprints. So, quick differences. Trauma disorders is where we address the trauma responses. That usually encompasses within a diagnostic framework. We focus on symptom like that acute dysfunction, of if not acute freeze, acute disassociation that happens in a person. That is impairment. That is an impairment, like someone goes into a panic attack. And when a client is having a panic attack, it's not within the scope of a coach. That's very clear to us. And usually, therefore, we call it the focus is impairment. And also, perhaps you could say the focus is symptom management. And often we see them in stressor-related disorders. So it could be acute stress disorder, CPTSD, PTSD, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, and so on. And then if you look at trauma imprints, they are adaptive frameworks. Through our previous sessions, you have come to learn perhaps impairments come across as challenging experiences because they make us unable to perform our day-to-day tasks, professional tasks, relational aspects. So those are direct, immediate, visible aspects that we can see as impairments, challenges that we experience. However, when we talk about trauma imprints, we notice that they are not only could be could create some hindrances, might limit us in some ways, but that's just only one side of the picture. The other side of the picture, the adaptive frameworks also help us, support us. They also can be valuable to us in many ways. And today lecture will reconfirm our awareness. And it leads not just only to just an acute or specific impairment, but it also become part of our relational aspects, our identity, how we relate to ourselves, what becomes our sense of self. And we look at trauma imprints from a human development lens. And that's where the coaching, the autonomy development of the client comes to play. Usually they are underlying, they are hiding in plain sight. We don't recognize that I am operated from a root of a trauma imprint. And usually we know that the impairments, direct challenges, what appear as symptoms are addressed in psychotherapy, mental health settings, or even psychiatric settings. At the same time, trauma imprintings can well be explored within a coaching environment. That's the good news. And that's the reason why we are learning in depth about supporting our clients to expand their autonomy by recognizing what are those underlying imprints playing a role in their life. Okay. You may notice that we talk about imprinting pathway earlier. According to the CTICC framework, we have this imprinting pathway. So there's an event, there's a trauma response, and then either it is repeatedly reinforced or it was not integrated. Therefore, a trauma imprint is created. And that could affect the person's identity, relationships, the body, their behavior, and the life outcomes. Some of these imprints have some of the benefits, and some of them also have costs as well. So let's dive in. Our mentality as we approach, if not our mindset when we approach the narrative of the clients, we don't see especially when we approach the client's trauma imprints, working with client trauma imprints, we do not approach the client as a victim. We do not see client that they have a problem. And that's exactly what coaching is. In coaching, we do not necessarily, we do see the client as fully capable. We see the client as the expert. Therefore, we do not see client in a victim lens. Rather, we see the client as someone strong, someone resilient, someone who is a survivor. That is how we look at. And in fact, that's also how in clinical care, in mental clinical care, also client is perceived. So you're aware that there are many areas of trauma imprinting. It's quite complex, as you have come to learn already. And in this experience, during this lecture series, we focus on three types of trauma imprinting. Identity imprinting. Who did I become because of what happened to me? How did my identity change? And that is one of the areas that is mostly that goes unnoticed in when we talk about trauma. Very often when we talk about trauma, we talk about CPTSD, we talk about PTSD. Those are the obvious ones. We talk about freeze response. We talk about fight and flight response. Very common, but it's not quite common to really talk about that when we have experienced challenging deprivation, adverse experiences in our past, that it directly uh, leaves a mark in our identity. It becomes who we are as sense of self. We can even approach it from even a more existential perspective. If you would like to use the word even spiritual perspective, we can explore that, asking ourselves, who are we? Now, you know that where our clients very often ask, where am I? Perhaps you ask that question yourself, where am I? Or what is my purpose? Why am I like this? Even existential questions. And then relational imprints. How do we relate to others? Now, we have touched base very gently about the attachment, how this key for attachment styles we discussed last time. At all, if you are interested in learning more about attachment, as you're aware, my sister, my colleague Lux, she conducts sessions on attachment, child adolescent development focused, developmentally focused coaching approach. So feel free to join her. Those sessions are also complementary, right? So how did what happened to me shape the way I relate, the way I love, the way I hate, the way I get angry, the way I get frustrated, annoyed, and also feel calm around certain people? And today we talk about somatic imprinting. How did my body learn to respond because of what happened? So these are three key questions we're addressing in these three lectures. And today we focus on somatic imprinting. Now, before we dive in, because somatic imprinting is quite a complex one to discuss, perhaps you hear very often people saying the trauma is stored in the body, trauma is stored in the fascia. Very often you hear this. And you will perhaps come to know that those are very loosely used, short ways of addressing how the somatic imprinting, very loose, very superficial ways of addressing. It's not entirely wrong. It's also not entirely accurate. Because we are going to look at something complex today, I would like to ground ourselves to an example to begin with. So you all work with leaders, maybe corporate leaders, maybe education leaders, maybe spiritual leaders, it may be parents, doesn't matter. You work with people who demonstrate leadership, who embody leadership. And I'm certain you may have heard some of these sayings, even quite literally when you work with your client. So in any way, I'm not saying that all of these personality traits and certain experiences, certain ways of perceiving them is a trauma imprint. Please do not get me wrong. I'm saying that it could be a potential trauma imprint. Perhaps some of these personality traits, how they perceive themselves, what they believe they are, sense of self, certain challenges, certain strengths may be related to trauma imprints. So we keep that in mind. So do not I'm not inviting you to think that every time one of your clients mention any of this, like if a client said, I'm very resilient, we don't think that, oh, the resilience came from a trauma imprint. We do not make that judgment. I think I don't even have to say that, but I think it's safe for me to mention that at the beginning. So this is only an example. We can't just make a quick judgment, and we will never make a quick judgment. The client could interpret things, client could make meaning if they would like to. If they don't want to, that's perfectly all right as well. So let's look at some of the common sayings our leaders say to us when we work with them. I trust my gut. Good. I'm always switched on. I perform best under pressure. By the way, one of those. I perform very well under pressure. I have incredibly high standards. I am very resilient. I'm highly independent. I read the room instantly. Perhaps you have said that too. I'm very calm under pressure. I never stop. I don't need much support. At the same time, we might also associate our clients with, I need a cigarette every now and then, every few hours. Or when there's stress, I'd like to go to the parking area and light a cigarette. Sometimes I just shut down. And sometimes you see with your clients, there are times that they're actively engaged. They reply to emails, they show up in time, they send you updates, they keep in touch, they pay in time, they do all that. Some clients disappear for a while. Some clients reply to your emails immediately, and sometimes they just disappear for a while. You don't hear from them for a few weeks. And once they're back, they're active again. So you notice that shutdown, not just only shutdown during a meeting or shutdown during that day, but also sometimes it could be days or weeks even. Some people say, I have no time for a social life. I can't sit still and do nothing. My neck is always stiff. My back is always tight or back is hurting. I carry tension in my shoulders. I don't notice why. I'm exhausted until I crash. I need to keep myself busy. You hear this kind of saying, and I'm certain you hear this kind of saying when you work with clients. Usually, clients would imagine, or they might not even imagine, that it's just who they are. I'm a hot-tempered person. I can easily be frustrated. And some people might use the word, it's a pet peeve, right? That's the epiquality. Those are some of the words that we might use to make sense of them. Is there anything wrong with it? I mean, of course, if you have a stiff back and a stiff neck, it could be problematic. But I don't think that there is anything seriously perhaps wrong with it once in a while having a neck problem. Like today, I'm having a back problem. My back hurts a little bit because I have been working, I don't know, like maybe 11 hours since the morning, right? And that is very understandable, right? So we also look at these possibilities with empathy, and we do not make judgments. And I don't have to say that because all of you are professional coaches. So as we continue on this session today, our exploration is going to be, who did I become because of what happened? Two, how does my body continue to protect me based on what it learned? Right? It's not just when we talk about trauma. Now we have come to learn trauma is an integral part of our existence. Without trauma, we are not here. It's not possible for us to be here without trauma. In fact, I look forward to sharing with you a video today from the Triassic period, 250 million years ago. What happened to a specific species when they grew up in an environment, or when they evolved in an environment where they had minimal trauma. I'll share with you in a bit. Right. So, how trauma shapes the way we breathe, move, brace, rest, and feel safe in our bodies. This is our seventh lecture. Understanding somatic imprinting from a psychological perspective. I think you already are aware as we continue our discussion so far, right? So it's a somatic imprinting occurs when a traumatic, adverse, stressful, depriving, or significant life experience contribute to enduring enduring, often unconscious patterns, enduring, repeating patterns. And these are unconscious. These could be in body sensation, physiological regulation, posture, movement, physical readiness, motor control, certain fatigue in our body, the way how we are limited in our movement, and the list goes on. The original has experience has passed, yet this body, our body, continues to experience these sometimes challenges, sometimes benefits after. And that is what we call somatic imprinting from a psychological perspective. And when we look at deep into somatic imprinting, there are a few areas that we can, at this stage, at this level, not through the clinical lens, but from a coaching lens, we can look at few areas. For an example, sensations in our body. Like if for an example, you might have a client who is so in tune with their body. You ask them, uh, where do you experience this emotion? They say immediately, I feel a tingling sensation expanding into my lungs, and I can see that there's a direct line connecting into my stomach, right? Wow, how amazingly aware they are. And I remember one of my clients who went through a deep psychedelic journey. She said that during the preparation stage, she talked about uh, some unfortunate sexual violence. She talked about some challenging experiences like miscarriages, um, and abortions because of the situations that she has been in, that she said she wants to heal her womb. And she said that she only feels pain in her womb. And when she went into the psychedelic experience, something activated in her, this is energetic experience, activated in her top of her head, which we could call a crown chakra. And then it reached like a light, reached into her womb and encompassed in light. The sensation she explained being divine. So some clients are so well in tuned to experience their somatic experiences. At the same time, some clients you ask, where in your body do you experience it? They go like, what do you mean by where in my body? Right? They have that face and they are honest, right? So you see, one have a deeper experience with the sensations of the body, some not. And some people have the ability to regulate themselves very quickly. And some people struggle to regulate. Sometimes when something happened, we keep thinking, keep ruminating, and we go on in cycles. We rehearse in our head for the worst case scenario most often, and we lose sleep days. But some people, there is this massive problem. They fall asleep in 1 minute. Posture, it affects posture based on how we stand, how we sit, to which side we lean more. It says something about us. I'm not saying that we can read it and we know it, but I'm saying it's saying a story about themselves, perhaps that they don't even know. No one knows either. Movement, the way how we move, the way how the way we smile, the way we use our hands, the way we walk, the way we stand, tells a lot about us. And the readiness. When something happens, how quickly do we engage? Or how much time it takes for us to engage? These are stories about somatic imprinting. And do you engage now as a professional coach? You do not need trauma-informed knowledge to inquire these, don't you think? Right? With our wonderful ICF competency, core competency framework, these are already encompassed. So you have already known this all this time. And I know that you have paid attention to these five. And of course, there are many more that you also, of course, can invite your clients to explore further. Moving on. Have you heard about, okay, maybe I'll ask you this question first. How many senses do we have? How many senses? Hmm?
Eight.
Perhaps you, oh, eight. That's a very clear number. Thank you, Susanna, right? So you might say eight. Um, As one might even say five, right? The key five ones: the hearing, the tongue, the temperature, the common five, the vision, the ear, the five, right? We hear the five senses very often, and Susanna broadened our horizons with eight. And yeah, eight, and it could also be much more as well. I think we as human beings, even science doesn't really know fully how many senses we fully have at the moment. This is my belief based on all my experiences in academia. I think there's still more of senses, right? So actually, there's something called interoception. Interoception is our bodily awareness. It's a type of perception. Now, when we can see, that is visual perception, auditory perception, kinesthetic perception, right? And so on. Sometimes you say, the day went very quickly. Sometimes you say, this day is never ending. That is your temporal perception, for an example. And there are many different types of perception within your body. Like just to mention a few, there are certain, when there's a toxic in your body, you experience that there's something wrong with your body. That's a type of interoception in your body. And sometimes you feel your organs hurt. I don't know whether you have experiences when you have worked very hard, when you have had late nights for over, let's say, a week, and then sometimes you're having a cup of coffee, you feel your heart is hurting, your lungs are hurting. It's not necessary, it's tiredness. You can feel that tiredness, right? And you experience hunger, for an example, right? Hunger is a perception. You feel arousal in many ways, right? Different types of arousal. We feel different tension, muscle tension. We can experience our heartbeat. So there are so many senses within our body, right? That we are not even conscious of. We haven't even studied them in school, maybe, right? So there are many different types of sensory possibilities within our body. The balance sense, for an example, right? Like how we are being balanced. The spacious awareness, that is a type of sensory. Um, so therefore, you are starting to recognize that there are so many different types of sensory within our body that we sometimes engage unconsciously. Sometimes you don't even realize that, oh, this is interoception that is playing a role, right? So let's remember that there are many other senses beyond these five senses very commonly we learn within our body. And if you like, I teach this in elaboration in our the trauma informed class, but here now we keep it simple because I know that you can always continue to research. So all of these different sensory organs, sensory possibilities that is within our body enable us to create somatic awareness. So we have mostly when we talk about these five senses, I think the reason why we limit it to five is because it's outward focus, if not stimuli coming from outside to inward focus. That's why it's recognized as a five. But at the same time, if you come to think of all the work that our body is doing without even us realizing, this marvelous, this magical body, if I call it, doing without even us realizing, there's a lot more going on. And in general, we call it interoception. So we keep that in mind, and interoception is part of our somatic awareness, and it's a very important type of awareness. So moving on, when we understand somatic imprinting deeply, as we said, repeated, overwhelming, or stressful experiences can influence several areas of our body. Autonomic regulation, threat prediction, interoception, as you just recognize that, sensory processing, the motor preparation, and several more things, balance, a spatial awareness, and can be continued, and how the body anticipates and respond to, in this case, perceived threat, because we are talking about trauma imprints. Perhaps if we talk about trauma responses, I might remove the word perceived threat. I might write perceived and actual threatening of safety. But in our case, often when there's a trauma imprint is present, there isn't really a true stress as such, perhaps perceived stress. Let me give an example of what perceived stress means. Now, when we were in hunter-gatherer times, at once when we went out, until we can come back to our, let's say we are living in a cave or wherever that we lived, or in a tree or under a tree, until we came back, our life was not guaranteed. Some predators, some falling off something, we could have died. So that means every time we went out looking for food, which is energy for us, we were in greater threat. So therefore, we lived in an environment, it was extremely stressful, extremely stressful. There was a lot of real danger, real threat, real stress. But now, if you come to think of, I live in the middle of Bangkok, and if I step out of my home, walk for 2 minutes, I'm certain that I'll be able to find some street food at almost very small amount of baht. I can easily buy some sticky rice and pork if I wanted to, or I can buy some fried fish or something like that. Very easy to find food. We don't necessarily have that kind of stress anymore for us to go out there and bring food. So we are not in that kind of great danger as we used to be when we were hunter-gatherers, for an example. But when we miss the bus, when we have to hand over that uh, report, when we have that difficult call, when we have to face our KPIs, when we have to do the appraisal, when we have to engage with someone that we don't like, there's some level of stress. That doesn't necessarily threaten our survival, but you notice that they use the same patterns that we used to use when we were hunter-gatherers long time ago, because they're encoded in our body, and that's who we have become. Therefore, it's not a real, I mean, submitting a report is not real threat. It's not threatening your life. It doesn't threaten your survival. But there's a hierarchy of how it goes deeper. Why am I afraid? I might lose my livelihood. If I lose my livelihood, my resources will run out. If I run out of my resources, I might get sick and ill. No one will care for me. If no one cared for me, I don't have any, and then I will die. That's a logical sequence of thinking. I'm not talking about that. I'm really thinking about this unconscious way of us processing danger while it doesn't exist. And as we talk about somatic imprinting, you very often hear just two things, isn't it? You end up, I mean, common talk. When we talk commonly, or when people talk about trauma, and also how the trauma is encoded in our body loosely, superficially, we hear often our nervous system encode trauma. Fascia has become almost like a trend word these days, right? There's a lot of people talking about fascia, really is talking about practices related to fascia and so on. Trend word. Fascia holds the information. Fascia stores we hear things like that. But in reality, those are just few elements of how somatically trauma is imprinted in our body. And in order for us to understand that, we need to begin with the processes that are involved. What is influencing in our body? So autonomic regulation, which means unconscious regulation. Autonomic nervous system, which is not which is unconscious things that we do. For an example, when when there's something coming our way fast, or when we touch something sharp or something hot, how our hand gets ejected from its place immediately. That's autonomic response, unconscious response. So that part of our nervous system. And then our nervous system is also capable of doing threat prediction, predicting threat, acutely predicting threat, acute every millisecond. So for an example, you are sitting in your chair, you're at home or your office, you're very comfortable right now. You know that there is no threat in your environment. But do you know your peripheral vision, without your awareness, with through autonomic nervous system, is predicting if there's threat. And we call this peripheral vision. peripheral threat prediction. It's happening all the time. And your ear, whether you like it or not, at all times is keeping an ear to see if something is might be dangerous for you. And then combining with autonomic nervous system threat prediction systems, the interoception is playing a role. And that's why sometimes we feel vomitish. Perhaps if you have like motion sickness, you know what that experience is like. And if you ate something that may have adverse effects in your body reacts to it. Diarrhea, for an example, is one of those experiences. So the interoception is telling you, way before you there's um, the actual experience, like let's say vomit, for an example, before you vomit, several minutes before, there's something off. That is interoception playing a role. And then there's sensory processing. Our body requires to process this sensory. The digestive system need to communicate with the pain perception and need to inform the central nervous system and then to our brain. And then it needs to inform us, our cerebral cortex, that, hey, there's something off. Sensory processing, communicating with the thinking brain. And then motor preparation. If it is a threat, there is always the potential of fight and flight response, right? So for an example, even vomit. Vomit is a flight response, if you come to think of it, right? Trying to withdraw from it. So the motor perception. Motor perception here means the body's ability to move. So when there's something attacking us, we move quickly. And in fact, this movement, like I said earlier, we touch something very hot unexpectedly, and then our hand almost automatically gets ejected from its place. And if you come to think of it, it requires no brain, literally. It only uses central nervous system, because the motor perception, if not the motor control, can be immediately activated with autonomic nervous system, because we thought, oh, my hand is hot. Let me move my hand. By the time we do that, because the thinking took time, we already burnt off a finger. But the motor perception, when it is connected with the autonomic regulation, we are able to do things without our conscious processing. So you're starting to recognize, when we look at somatic printing, it's not just about fascia, it's not just about only the nervous system. There are so many systems that are integrated, interconnected. In fact, was this simpler when we talk about relational imprinting? Was this simpler when we talk about identity imprinting? It wasn't. Now we have the door opening to recognize that what we singularity, what we thought as relational imprinting, what we thought as identity imprinting, and so many other types of imprinting that are possible, we thought about them in isolation. Now, as you open this door of somatic imprinting, you all of a sudden start to recognize none of this works in isolation. They are all integrated systems. Right. So let's look at the imprinting pathway that we always discuss. This is not necessarily a scientifically validated framework, colleagues, right? This is something that I invented for us to simplify things and share, right? Just to be also scientifically aligned with you as well. So event, there's a trauma response. I mean, these are aligned with scientific research, scientific findings. What I mean is that this is not a standard framework. It is a framework that I have created under CTICC so that we all can make sense. So there's an event, there's a trauma response, and it is repeatedly reinforced or was not integrated. Now, in this case, integrated means they did not necessarily look into, like, let's say a mother lost a child, and perhaps their religion or her faith has taught us, like for an example, if they're in some kind of like a non-duality religion, right? Non-duality religion invite us to say, who is e- look at the experience outside of your identification, right? So that directly indicates, I'm not against non-duality, right? I'm just using an example of how certain things can play a role in certain ways, right? So the non-duality faith, belief system, philosophy says, when when something happens, let me get the right words. When something happens, look at it without identifying with it. And before that experience arrived, what was present? So it's actually basically trying to say that there's only one universal consciousness, if I just debrief it like that. So let's say there's a person, this mother follows non-duality faith. So something happened to their child. Let's say she lost the child. So she asked herself, before I identified with it, if I look at it, to whom did it happen? It happened to the universal consciousness. So we almost um, dissociate ourselves from that experience because our belief system is non-dual. But does that mean what happened to their body, what happened to their mind, what happened to their nervous system can be justified by a non-duality principle? It cannot. So we are starting to recognize that how non-integration might happen. I think this is an extreme example. I didn't plan to say that, but it just came. It just came through, right? So they spiritually bypassed. That's what we call spiritual bypass. Perhaps let me share a simple example. Uh, the same example. It's what it is. God gave, God took. That's it. I don't want to process it. Could be considered as spiritual bypass in very simple context. Can be more complex than that. So therefore, we do not integrate that experience. We do not tap into what grief means. We do not take the right series of actions to integrate that experience so that we can release that. We can create an emotional release. We can come to terms with it rather than bypassing from it. So when we bypassed it, when we not integrated it, it can go in a direction of into the trauma imprint. And that becomes a pattern, and that affects our behavior and coming to our life outcomes. So in simple terms, past experience, present sensory information, perceived threat, and the context creates a prediction. So when we talk about trauma imprinting from a somatic perspective, somatic trauma imprinting is most of the time, always might be wrong, most of the time is a prediction. It's a predicting how should the body react to what might be coming, but it's fueled by the past experience, right? So based on our prior learning, taking present information, our body predicts this is what should happen. And I think a good example is purging, vomiting, right? Because our body, our ancestors have been poisoned before. They have survived. So past experience is if there's our interoception is saying that our baroreception is off, that would mean that there is something chemically wrong within our body. So the moment we recognize that, the present, the sensory, right? So you recognize the importance of knowing what interoception is before we go into this discussion. Knowing that interoception is telling us that there's something wrong with you. So go into a purge, go into a vomit. That's the context. And before it happens, the body predicts with those the intestine movement that we are going to vomit, right? So you're starting to recognize how intricate it is. And the body may respond in ways how it predicts not only what it actually is experiencing. And that's why I said earlier, when we go out there in the hunter-gatherer times, there's something really happening. And we are responding to that. But in our modern society that we live in, it's the context, it's not actual experience. So our body tries to predict based on what it knows. Right. So then we would like to understand the state to pattern. From how do we go from the temporary state to the pattern, right? So the tension, heart rate, breath, mobilization, the motor mobilization, stomach uh, having trouble, all of that, when it is repeated over and over again, it becomes it becomes activated automatically, in other words, unconsciously. When we say automatically, we mean unconsciously in similar contexts, they get triggered. So that's why my grandmother, when she ran low on resources, she had a stomach problem. When I was late to come home, she had that same problem. And when my mom got sick, she had the same problem. Perhaps she started that pattern when my grandfather committed suicide. I don't know, I'm just making it up. Perhaps that started when my grandfather committed suicide. But it started showing up in different places of her life on a very regular basis. Now, as I come to think of my grandmother, those days when I was growing up with her as an adolescent, I recall more times of she's being relaxed and peaceful than uh, she's having stomach problems very often, quite literally running to the lavatory. And that's how trauma imprinting, somatic imprinting works interestingly. So what can become patterned? And as I say, what can become patterned, you're also noticing this is sharpening your ear. This is sharpening your listening skills. Why? Because when your clients are talking about where they have the problem, they might be indirectly, unknowingly, unconsciously communicating to you what had been patterned. Therefore, this little slide is very important to you. Breathing patterns. So when ICF says in the core competency, when the client's body changes, energy changes, when the client's emotion changes, the tonality changes, pay attention to it is not just a communication skill. It comes from a deeply rooted scientific space. And in fact, it is rooted in trauma science, if you come to think of it. What can become patterned? So what are we listening for? When the client's breathing pattern changes. No, perhaps in their day-to-day life, also during the coaching sessions. Muscle tone, right? Posture, the change of the posture, facial or jaw tension, startle response. Startle, right? Sometimes people in authority, when there's an authority figure, people can't think. Usually they're sharp. They can think fast. They do things fast. But sometimes when there's an authority figure, they just go into a startle response. Their brain just disorganized. And readiness. Sometimes people are sharp and ready, but in some situations around certain people, they are not ready. They are slower than usual. Sometimes sometimes there are people who take care of everything on the dot, everything perfect. But around some people, around certain situations, during certain periods of time, they become very clumsy and they don't know why. Because you're not recognizing that we were triggered. That person was triggered in that environment. When they are not in a triggered environment, rather when they're in a more pleasant, more regulated state, they act normally. They act more sharply, for an example, right? And then how the movement habits. How do we use our hands? How do we smile? Do we smile or do we not? Which side do we lean more towards, right? Pain sensitivity, sleep arousal, all of those things play a role in uh, how we are conditioned, how we have encoded certain experiences from our past and how they show up in our current life. Therefore, now earlier you may have looked at 5 things and thought, oh, those are some areas that I can keep an eye on. Now you're starting to recognize the list increases and not limited to. These are just a few that we can cover within this short session. Oh, here comes the story that I mentioned that I'd like to share with you, right? So this is a theoretical list. These are prehistoric animals, right? Triassic period, approximately about 250 million years ago. And this is Listrosaurus, and also this name is Erythrosuchids, right? Erythrosuchids. These two animals used to live approximately 250 million years ago while Earth was changing. So I'm going to share with you a video, and I do not own this video because therefore I'm not going to be able to record. I will come back to this image in a minute, but let's look at this video for a minute. Make sure that I am sharing sound. Share sound. Um, One second before we start. Make sure that I stop recording. As I said that I do not want this